Chair LaFrance has asked me to conduct this meeting as she is in the AML sessions today, and I believe she's called in. And this is a work session addressing the 2022 proposed alcohol tax. And who's here from the administration to take it away? Or do we need to do a roll for this? This is a work session.
Yes, let's go ahead and do a roll call if you don't mind.
Yes, Madam Clerk, go ahead.
Ms. Allard?
Here.
Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Ms. Kennedy? Ms. LaFrance? Mr. Presberdia? Ms. Quinn Davidson? Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Mr. Littleton?
Here.
And Ms. Zalatel? Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Now, let's dive in. Who from the administration is ready to lead? Is it Marilyn?
Thank you, Chris. This is Amy. So on behalf of the administration, Marilyn Bonsoff, the acting OMB director, will be leading this, and she is assisted by Courtney Peterson from OMB, and from the mayor's office, we have Alexis Johnson, Larry Baker, and then myself. Marilyn, you're up.
Thank you. Hello, thank you for attending. This presentation is actually November 15th. I apologize for discrepancy on the first page. The purpose of this work session is to review the alcohol tax and how it is being used in 2021, this year, and how the use of it aligns with the allowed requirements and the mayor's priorities in the 2022 proposed budget. The data in this work session is excerpts from previous work sessions and information that is provided in the 2022 proposed budget documents available at uni.org, departments, and Office of Management and Budget. First, we'll go over the mayor's priorities. These are the priorities that were used to develop the 2022 proposed budget. Public safety, economically prosperous and business-friendly community, compassionately resolving the homelessness crisis, no decrease in services to the public while seeking savings and alignment of programs to the entity that should achieve the mission, and also reorganization for more efficient and effective government. Here we have the charter section that established the alcoholic beverages retail sales tax. The tax levy was effective February 1st of this year, and thus programs are just starting up this year. The use of the tax is for three items, only three, these three bullets after the payment of administrative costs, which include the three items are funding to combat and address the child abuse, sexual assault, and domestic violence, funding for police-related criminal justice personnel and first responders, and funding for substance misuse treatment, prevention programs, detoxification or long-term addiction recovery facilities, mental and behavioral health programs, and resources to prevent and address Anchorage's homelessness crisis. And this is all to be above the 2020 baseline. The next slide that we're presenting, and we'll be presenting three more slides. The next slide, this slide here is just the 2021 actuals and against the budget. This slide shows the 2021 budget and actuals as of November 10th. A similar slide was shown at the October 22nd, 2022 proposed budget work session. This slide shows the activity that showed the activity through October 21st.
Marilyn, could you hold on for just a minute? I would like to note for the record that both Ms. Quinn Davidson and Mr. Presverdia have arrived at the meeting, and Ms. Kennedy is also here. And there's been a request, if you're not speaking, could you please mute your phones because the noise that's coming through is pretty loud. Go ahead.
Thank you. So this is the 2021 activity for the alcohol tax. Again, we had showed the same format in the 2022 proposed budget presentation, but that activity was through October 21st. This shows the activity through November 10th. Since October 21st, there's been about $300,000 more of expending, and it was pretty proportionate between the allowable uses. And also the revenue postings increased about $1 million and are expected to actually be about $1 million over budget by the end of the year. The format of this slide shows the allowable uses, groups of allowable uses, and appropriations by departments, with the budget being the first three numerical columns, encumbrances being the next column, and actuals being the bold outline column. And again, this is just activity posted to our financial system through November 10th. And please note that this does not show committed activity that is still planned for this year, but that isn't posted to the financial system. I'll pause for questions.
Members, if you have questions, you can either put yourself in the chat or text me. Ms. Kennedy, go ahead. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to be really clear on the encumbrance and pending and actuals, and then what the number on the difference actually reflects. So out of, if we just take that first one, that child abuse, sexual assault and domestic violence, on the subtotal, we're saying that we've actually promised $3.2 million, and we've really only of that amount spent about 129,000. But basically the 3 million is promised. So then can you, well, maybe you haven't really gotten to that part to explain exactly what the difference is. But anyway, I just want to make sure that the actuals is a different number than the encumbrance and the pending, and just to make sure that that number is not also included in that encumbrance number. Thanks.
Through the chair, that is correct. The encumbrance amounts are not, or pardon me, the actuals amounts are not included in the encumbrance amounts.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So if no one else has a question, I'm going to jump in the queue. Why are these funds not yet spent for this year?
Courtney, we had the discussion about truing up at the end of the year. Can you just explain that to them?
This is Courtney in OMB through the chair. Some of the funds, such as the $3 million for the child abuse, sexual assault, are grants to outside entities. And so it's a matter of them standing up their programs and spending, and us then reimbursing or giving those funds over to those entities.
So Chris, just to follow up on that. So what you'll see here is, because we're not quite to the end of the year, so the books always end up following after the action. So once those encumbrances, those monies have been spent by those outside agencies, those grants, for example, then we'll record them. So you'll see a true up that happens after January 1.
Right, but I'm more concerned about the what looks to be about 7 million other dollars budgeted, not yet looking to be encumbered or in queue or in the flow. Like all the budgeted category versus all of the encumbrance and pending journals or actuals, the difference is vast. So I'm trying to understand what the plan is there. Is the plan just to sit on that money?
Go ahead, Courtney.
This is Courtney again through the chair. They, some of them is the lag time of hiring staff. You know, some of those programs were, the funding didn't start until February. Some of the departments did not start the hiring process at that time. And so it was a lag of actually getting individuals hired. So, you know, there may be a gap of spending in some of those programs. Some of them are the grant funds going out. And so that is just the the lag of the entities spending and us then paying those different entities.
Yeah, so as you're looking at this, Chris, this is Amy. As you're looking at this, there's not $7 million that's just sitting there unspent. I mean, it just may be a part of, yes, some of those positions weren't filled throughout the entire year, so there might be some left over. But much of it is what you're seeing is just we haven't journaled it because it hasn't maybe been reported yet from some of the grants that have been let, if that makes sense.
Right, the grants I get, but a lot of these are internal expenditures. That's okay. I'm sure there are others with questions. There are 2 now, so we'll go on and we might have to come back to this. Next in the queue is Mr. Weddleton, and then after that, Mr. Prisverdia.
Thanks. I want to follow up on this a bit. So it sounds like, so on the grants, is it, they just get reimbursed as they spend the money? I guess that's question 1. And then if there's money left over, like grants weren't made, or, you know, the money that was kind of internal to the municipality that wasn't spent, would we expect to spend that next year, or do we build up a savings account? What's the plan for that?
So I'll take a stab at the grants questions. There's multiple types of grants. Some grants are just here's the amount, and some are reimbursable grants. But with respect to the true up, and this is what I was trying to explain, which I didn't do a very good job. The true up will happen, and so the assembly and the administration, frankly, will get a better view as we approach first quarter what those actuals are when we close the books on 2021. So the time to be able to see the actual amount that you have left over, whether it's because some departments, you know, didn't hire the staff throughout the entire year, so we had some, you know, that was previously appropriated that's left over, or whether it's because for whatever reason you have other money that was allocated but not appropriated. The time to be able to have a real true number of what that is will be at first quarter.
Okay, can I follow up, Chris?
Go ahead.
Okay, so that's really typical of what we do for all the departments. And so sometime for the first quarter budget, we may find out, oh gosh, there was 500,000 that wasn't used last year out of the alcohol tax, and we could allocate it to 2022 activities. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Weddleton.
Okay, so basically it's normal. Thanks.
Mr. Presverdia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm probably going to ask the same questions because I'm not tracking very well here. So, in encumbrance and pending are funds that have been promised but not spent. Actuals is how much we've actually spent, and difference is not encumbered, so not promised and not spent. But I'm hearing something different, that in that difference number, that 6.6 million, you're saying there is some of that that has an intended destination. Is that correct?
This is Courtney through the chair. The 6.6 is the difference currently on the books. So we still have technically 2 full months of posting in the financial system to have transactions posted in there. So I would say committed into the programs as they were appropriated and spent in those purposes. The expectation is that the departments will continue those programs until the end of the year.
Right. But based on the spend that you've seen over the course of last year, what's the anticipated amount that is going to be left over at the end of the fiscal year? Do you have a sense of that?
Through the chair, no, not at this time.
Okay. All right. And just for clarification, just so the 6.6 million will get spent down in the normal sort of pattern of spending, but there is not grants that have been encumbered to that number at this point. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, Ms. Kennedy again in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I might be beating a dead horse here, but I think I'm on the same track with trying to actually figure out why we can say we have 6.6 million in terms of a difference. It seems to me that even if that all this money to a certain extent has been encumbered in some way, shape, or form. So I'm just concerned that that's not reflected either in the encumbrance column or in the actuals. But it just sounds like until we have all of that information back in, we can't really track that at this point. Is that fair to say? Because obviously that 6 million is going to end up in one column or the other by the time we true this all up, correct? Or at least most of it?
Ms. Kennedy, I believe you're correct to the large part, and part of the confusion, what people are looking at, I want to just point to the title of this. This is activity posted in SAP. There's a lot of things that we are in the process of spending down, but maybe it hasn't been journaled yet. It hasn't been posted yet. The PO is not in the system yet. So, and this goes back to the issue what OMB raised is that we still have 2 months of spending yet. So I don't want everybody to get excited thinking they have $7 million they can just spend, because we really do have to true up the books in order to give you an accurate number, but we have to allow the year to close to be able to tell you what that balance is. Might there be a balance? Yes. But I just caution members to be a little cautious as they see this.
So, yeah, Amy, I think it's the other way. The concern is that we set out priorities, or at least for some people, that we set out priorities. And we haven't really done a consistent check back on what's being implemented and when and how and why. And therefore, there's a big unknown if the priorities that were set up for last year are being honored in the process or not. And so that's one side of the question, like what can we do in the last 2 months of this year to make sure that the priorities established in the 2021 budget are addressed by these funds so that we don't actually end up with a giant pile of unexpended alcohol tax receipts at the end of the year for the first quarter. So I want to make sure we're thinking of it both ways. One is, yes, we may have some money, but there are ongoing expenses. And also, what are we doing to meet the goals so that we know kind of, if I had another column or another table, it would be projects underway right now that we're just getting up to speed, but that wasn't asked for, so I don't expect it today. Ms. Kennedy?
And yeah, and if I could just follow up on that, Mr. Chair, thank you. Yeah, for me, it's more a question of, did people who were going to use these funds actually then apply? Because I know some of this was more in a grant form anyway. And so was just curious as to whether or not some of these programs actually got off the ground and are running the way that we thought they were going to when we decided to allocate those funds to them. So yeah, my question is more one of, or my concern is more one of how we really accurately reflect where the money is, what's promised, and what is actually being accessed the way we thought it was going to be. And it just sounds like we're just, this particular graphic, it just tells us where we're at a certain point in time, which was, I guess, as of the 10th. And it just doesn't really reflect all the activity that's still ongoing. And, and I'm okay with that. I certainly understand that after the end of the year, first quarter budget review, we'll understand a lot better. But anyway, just trying to really interpret what these numbers mean at this point. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Mr. Presbrity is back in the queue unless there's someone who wanted to speak to Ms. Kennedy's point. Mr. Presbrity, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, just two things. One, just reinforcing your comment, Mr. Constant, that the numbers aren't concerning because it's money I want to spend. It's concerning because money has not been spent, or it appears money has not been spent, and that's worrisome to be this far into the year and for it to appear as though many of the projects that we had hoped would get off the ground and start appear to maybe not have started or gotten off the ground. But my question really is beyond the numbers that we're seeing. And I don't know if this has come up already. I was a little bit late to the meeting, but the question about funding not replacing operational funds, is that articulated in this in any way in terms of the categories or titling, that these are all funds that are going to not replace operating costs, but to fund projects that are different from those? Is there a way that you've labeled these or categorized these in a way that's clear?
Yeah, thanks. Through the chair, Mr. Perez-Verdia, this is Amy. I would like to point you to the email that I sent to the assembly just prior to this work session, because I think you're probably honing in on a couple of the ones, probably the epidemiologist, probably the MCT. And those, I don't know that I specifically addressed the MCT in there, but again, our goal here is not to supplant current operations with alcohol tax, but to fit within those buckets that the alcohol tax allows. So if you'll just look to that email that I sent, I think it'll answer most of your questions.
Yeah, no, I've seen the email. I was really referring to the way that this is categorized on here, and if there is so that was really what I was considering is the way that these things are labeled and done. So.
Through the chair.
Right. Yep, go ahead.
That they are exhibited in this fund. They are presented in this fund because they are above the baseline. So this fund is a separate fund from the general government operating, from other funds.
Thanks.
All right, I guess the next slide.
So this slide is a summary of the changes from the 2021 budget to the 2022 proposed budget, as shown in the columns on the right, with the categories that were shown in the previous slide and also allowable per charter as the rows. We go into the details in the next and last two slides. Any questions?
I had a specific question on an item on the previous slide that I forgot to ask. What was the $50,000 added for the mayor's office?
It's right here, like, right here. Right here. Do you remember?
Mr. Constant, I think we had added that for communication about alcohol tax
Okay.
goals, but I don't know whether it's spent or not, but anyway, if that's helpful.
All right. Thank you. Good enough. And if we want to move on, that's fine. That was the only item I couldn't recall.
May I actually, since we moved back to the slide, sorry, I'm driving, so it's hard for me to type to get in the queue. May I ask a question?
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. So I know we've been discussing this, and maybe maybe I'm missing it, or maybe Amy, it's in the email you sent that I haven't had a chance to review yet. But is the administration suggesting that we can't know or don't know at this moment what money is going to be granted? Is that a list you could put together for us? I mean, it'd be really nice for us, even if we're doing some adjustments in first quarter, to know who's using those grants and whether we're achieving, the goals that we set out to do and all of those things.
Sure. Thank you. Through the chair, Assemblymember Quinn Davidson. Yeah, we can absolutely extrapolate from the budget and show you all the, what has been granted. I'm going through my mind and I can't think of any of the grants that the Assembly has appropriated that we haven't actually issued. So our goal is not to say you can't know this. We're just saying that the books haven't closed yet. So we haven't reconciled yet to know how much is left over until the books close. But we can certainly pull together a list for you for all the grantees that have been issued to present. That would be, I think, fairly simple for us to do.
Okay, may I follow up, Mr. Constant?
Please. Yeah.
And just to be clear, Amy, I didn't mean that we can't know, like you're not letting us know. I just meant we're not able to know because it's not available yet. But what I would love to see is, what's already been granted, what we plan to grant the remainder of this year, and what we expect will be left after that point. Because it seems like at this point, it's mid-November, we probably should know what money will be spent in 2021. If we don't, I think that could be explained, but it just seems a little too vague at this point. I'm just wondering if you could follow up with more info.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I wrote down all 3 questions and I'll be happy to follow up.
And I just want to add, though, let's not be so focused on grants only that we miss the labor funded through the Muni for programs and services. So if we can make sure it's both of those categories of expenditures, not just the grants, because it wasn't 100 or 80 or even 60% grants, it was a bunch of different expenditures.
Okay, I wrote that down too. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. All right, sorry, next slide. Again.
Okay. Went over a view of the changes from 2021 budget to the 2022 proposed budget. I can go to the next slide that shows the details.
Sounds good.
Okay. So this slide is the first of 2 that shows the detail by row of the activities or within each category of allowable use. This is a schedule that is presented in the Appendix R of the 2022 proposed budget document. One thing that we did do and are showing in this presentation that's a little different is the columns. We show the 2021 budget, then the 2022 continuation costs, the 2022 proposed changes, and then the 2022 proposed totals. In the document that's available online, we actually have the middle 2 columns combined, but this shows the continuation and the proposed changes. This shows the first 2 categories of child abuse, sexual assault, and domestic violence uses, and then the first responder uses. And the next slide is for the other 2 categories. Are there questions here or?
Wow.
I think folks are just chewing on this information right now and trying to understand what it implicates. But yeah, I guess, Mr. President.
Yeah, I'm chewing on it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering your intention for this meeting and how much we get into the rationale for the decisions that are being made in this. Whether the intention here is to just understand the framework and the where the money is and where the proposed budget is putting it, or whether this is the time where we actually dig into the choices that are being made. I would ask for your direction there, knowing that we only have 30 minutes.
So I will just speak up. I am not certain who asked for this work session, if it was the Budget and Finance Committee chairs. If it was, then I would defer to them on the answer to that question. But I don't actually know who tried to secure this work session.
So I guess my question then would be to the administration, Amy. My questions on this sheet are going to be primarily around the reasons behind these changes. I know that we're going to have a separate work session specifically on the mobile crisis team, but I don't believe we have work sessions on some of the other areas. Are you prepared to answer those questions at this time, or does that need to be done in a different setting?
Thank you for the question through the chair, Assemblymember Perez Verdia. We can certainly answer some of the policy-driven questions as to why certain things were done certain ways. If you have a specific nuanced question that I can't answer, I'm certainly happy to get back with you.
Yeah, well, I'll just go ahead and ask. I mean, I'm going to save the MCT questions for that work session, but if you could just talk to us about the justification for cutting the early education grants in half and eliminating the 250,000 that are under health. If you could just address those two for me, please.
I can speak to the 250 under health briefly. That was just a one-time fund that we put forward at the last minute with funds available, and this is one of those that could be addressed by the assembly, but it was one time, so it was a removal of the funds that were one time added. It wasn't contemplated in that process to make that a permanent funded category for those dollars.
Okay.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair. And with regard to the reallocation or the prioritization of other alcohol tax money away from some of these other programs, there really was a concerted effort to look at the whole picture as not only a municipality, but a school district. And it's our understanding that the Anchorage School District just came into about $110 million grant. So we felt to align the mission of education and early education, it would be appropriate for them to kind of help in that arena. And that would free up resources for the municipality to prioritize other needs, specifically relating to other vulnerable populations, such as the homelessness issue, or I mean, that was it. You know, this work group that was put together, they're really trying to solve this issue, and there has to be a place where that funding comes from. So we thought, looking at the whole picture, ASD could pick up the tab, if you will, on some of this pre-K, and we could divert and use these funds for another very high use and high important issue.
Mr. Conson, I'll further that for Ms. Perez-Verdia. You, as you know, we spent many hours focusing on how that we were going to take care of our most vulnerable population. And when we looked at the total, you know, actually the investment increases rather than decrease on that one line item, as Mr. Bosky pointed out. We became aware of that grant over on the ASD side that could supplement that, but the vulnerable population really needs these dollars if we're going to address the issue in front of us.
Mr. Chair, just a quick follow-up.
The budget reduction, but as you can clearly see, it's an increased budget as it relates to homelessness.
So, Mr. Perez-Verdia, then I have Mr. Weddleton and then Ms. Kennedy.
Yeah, just a clarification whether you've communicated with ASD and they have confirmed that they will be using their grant funds to supplement the reduction in this area.
Thank you for that. ASD hasn't confirmed it, but as you know, this is very much an iterative process. And while the administrators might have one idea, it doesn't mean the school board will agree. But we do think it's an appropriate alignment of missions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Weddleton.
Well, thanks. So I'm sorry, Amy, did I catch that right? $110 million grant? And can you, I think we have a meeting with them on their budget and our budget coming up, but are there parameters on that grant? That's huge.
That's it. That's the thereabout number that we've been told. I'm sure there are parameters on that grant, Mr. Weddleton. I don't have them in front of me though, but we'll get the information that we have and we'll be happy to share it with you.
Okay. So I appreciate that. And then I guess the other point you made, that, all of these things are important and we don't have the money to do all that we want to do with all of it. And there's, a big swing here towards the homelessness thing, which is the plan that we've been developing over the last many months. And it'll take money to operate it. So when this really stretches us out there, is this envision that we will need these alcohol tax funds for homelessness going forward for many, many years? Because my understanding also is once we get things geared up and running, that we'll be able to tap into more federal grants, Medicaid, Medicare, whatever, and things like that to lower the direct costs from our funds that would go to operating, the system for homeless. How far have you delved into that?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Weddleton, I think that your assessment is absolutely correct. However, at this point, as we all know, we don't know what the level of those, as we talked, like the medically fragile people, obviously that they'll come out of Medicaid and we have different sources, but at this point for 2022, we think this is an appropriate use of funds. A year from now, we'll have a lot better direction, a lot better, some parts of our facilities will be in place, hopefully, and the source of funding will follow. But right now, for 2022, every available dollar is going to be needed, I think, to stand up what we know has been a priority for the community.
All right, thanks. And Chris, you can put me back in the queue at some point. Or you could go ahead and go through the loop there. Thanks.
All right, thank you. First, Mr. Dunbar, because he hasn't asked a question, then I'll have you, Ms. Kennedy and Mr. Weddleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, my question's actually on the next slide, although it's all sort of one section. This is this is Appendix R. It's just so large it has to go on to the next slide. So I have two questions here. One is at the bottom there, where it tallies up alcohol beverage retail sales tax revenue. That's 11.83 million. Where is that number from? Is that the number that we projected in the 2021 budget that ended up being lower because we ended up collecting about $1 million more than we expected? Or is that including the additional revenue is that the actual amount we have collected? And I guess it can't be, right? Because we still have all of November and December. So I guess my question is, where does that number come from?
Through the chair, that is the number that was projected during the development of the 2021 proposed or revised budget.
Right, and so that actually ended up being about $1 million lower than what we have collected, or we're expecting to collect by the end of the year, according to Mr. Moore from our budget meeting. So that's interesting. That's good to know. That means that there is both that additional $1 million there, and then there also is probably additional revenue because this number in 2021 didn't take into account January because we in February is when we started the tax. So just something to consider. So next question, under health. So we have a number of positions here. We have epidemiologist, housing and homeless services program coordinator. We have the public health nursing supervisor and public health nurses. So a couple questions here. First of all, I thought the epidemiologist and the public health nurses were more dedicated towards actual COVID work. And if that's the case, then I'm wondering how they can fit into these buckets legally. And then second, these positions obviously already exist. So how can we add them to the alcohol tax budget without violating the principle delineated in the ballot initiative that we cannot backfill positions?
Courtney, you want to take that one?
This is Courtney, through the chair, Mr. Dunbar. The positions didn't exist in 2020. The positions currently do exist in 2021. However, the alcohol tax is the baseline of the operating budget of 2020. And so we are still in compliance with that eligibility requirement of charter.
So your position is, you know, so for example, the mayor created a variety of new positions, like Ron Thompson's position in development services, for example. He created that in July. And so it's part of the 2021 budget. They're using other funds. You could shift that over to the alcohol tax because that position didn't exist in in that exact month. The people of Anchorage voted on the ballot initiative. That's sort of the legal position of the administration.
No, that's not what we're saying at all. What we're saying is these particular positions relating to public health do fit within there. Let me take the epidemiologist, for example. In those specific buckets of requirements, whether it is, childhood sexual assault, domestic violence, whether it's homelessness or the other bucket. I mean, the email that I sent you today, I think it directly outlines how the epidemiologist, we believe, fits into that categorization of using alcohol tax dollars. And in this particular case, not only does an epidemiologist investigate sources of and transmission of communicable diseases, including COVID-19 in vulnerable populations, but it's also using data relating to COVID testing and vaccine hesitancy within the community, but also this data relating to very vulnerable populations. And one of the populations is the homeless population. And so we think because of the way the epidemiologist is and can be used, it will serve that vulnerable population, which is right in line with the use of the alcohol tax dollars.
Okay, so for example, if we had a nursing position that was that was stood up in 2021 in response to COVID for vaccinations, for example, and they were vaccinating people, they were part of the general operating budget in 2021. The position of the administration is that could be converted over to the alcohol tax, both because it didn't exist in April of 2020 when people, voted on this, but also because, homeless people experiencing homelessness are among the community that received vaccines, even though the position was originally like general population vaccines.
In part, yeah, I think you're exactly right, Mr. Dunbar. I mean, you have to remember the public health nurses aren't just out there doing COVID vaccinations. I use that as one example, but this is a dedicated group of employees who very frequently are working in a population that has potential mental and behavioral health issues, or maybe they're a vulnerable population. So, we're not trying to say this is one part of their job, so that's the only reason they qualify. This is a core piece of their job is to serve this population. But again, they are above and beyond the 2020 baseline. So we don't think this is an inappropriate use of these funds. We think this fits within the legislative intent.
So I'll stop harping on this. I'll just say I do think this violates the legislative intent. And I understand, I mean, you're making colorable arguments here. As is often the case in a legal disagreement, you have people on both sides. But given that they were part of the 2021 budget and were using general tax revenue for that purpose, and they weren't at that time contemplated as part of the specific kind of programs targeted towards these three buckets, but rather were a general program using general operating dollars, to now switch those over to 2022, I think is exactly the kind of backfilling that was prevented by 2020. I understand that we have sort of a legal disagreement about that, but I think that's something that we'll have to work out, I think, in the next week. But thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. You had a follow-up question.
Thank you. I just wanted some more clarification on the figures that are under the 2022 continuation column. And I just wanted to know if those, kind of trying to follow what you have there listed as employees, that is recognized as well. Obviously recurring and then filled positions, but if I'm looking at the principal accountant, there's an additional $26,714. So is that just a kind of like a contractual increase in salary for that person, or is that actually other positions? So can you just tell me a little bit more about all those figures that fall in that 2022 continuation column? Thanks.
Through the chair, this is Marilyn. That is correct. The 2022 continuation is the full year is the programs at the 21 programs at the 2022 costing. Because the program started in February, they weren't full year costed in 2021. And so a lot of the continuation cost for the positions is just bringing in that January budget. And then additionally, there's the contractual collective bargaining agreement adjustments also for positions. And those are the items amounts that are included in the continuation column.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense and that helps. And you might have explained that earlier and I missed it, but thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, I have just one process question for today. How many more slides are there?
This is the last.
That's the last one, sir.
Okay, good. So, okay, then I guess now could be a time for some open conversation, or we could maybe ask you to pull up the email that you'd sent out that kind of walk through some of this stuff, because it came out pretty late. And if we have 15 minutes, it could be an opportunity to just walk through those issues there, or we could just call it at this point and reconvene when the questions have kind of been filtered through what we just heard and people have had a chance to read that email. So we can go either way.
It's totally your call. I think we've covered most of it in there.
So Mr. Weddleton just put himself in the queue. So thank goodness for good questions.
Thanks. Thanks, Chris. So look at this. We've heard a lot through emails and so on that each of these, we basically got 3 categories to spend funds in, and there's some people have an expectation that it would be evenly distributed. So a third in each of those, and we don't really come close to that here at all. It's roughly 3 for the first. Looks like 1.5 for the second, and then 8.3 for the third. So way out of that. Do you? I guess clearly, I'd say you don't have a sense that it has to be split even between those categories, or is there any evidence that it should be?
Mr. Weddleton, through the chair, I don't know that, I can't answer for the assembly members, but it's not the administration's belief that these had to be split equally.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah, follow up, John. Okay, we have 2 more folks in the queue, and I'm putting myself in the queue after them. Go ahead, Mr. Kumar.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. This is a little bit of a different issue, but it's still very much about the alcohol tax. I have received a couple of emails, and I'm sure my colleagues from South Anchorage have as well, from people in Girdwood who are sort of concerned about what they perceive as a lack of benefit to their community from the alcohol tax. That is, a variety of the programs here are obviously based in Anchorage. Something like the MCT, they don't see it as benefiting Girdwood. It's just too far away. But they say, well, look, we collect a lot of alcohol tax in Girdwood because of our bars and the Alyeska, but we don't see a concomitant benefit to the community. Now, leaving aside the fact that probably a lot of people actually purchasing the alcohol in Girdwood are from Anchorage that drive down there. Is there any way to track or set aside any portion of the grants in particular to see that some of them go to Girdwood-based organizations? And I know we haven't done any geographic tracking, and this also kind of gets back to the point that Austin was making about, like, we're not totally sure which organizations have received the grants or are going to receive the grants. But I was wondering if we could speak to, has any of the money gone to Girdwood or Girdwood-based organizations, and do we see that happening in the future?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Dunbar. I can't answer that for you today. I don't have the list of geographic, categorized by geography. We would certainly welcome any organization based in Girdwood or providing services in Girdwood to apply for some of these grants as those grants are let out. But I would just like to, be really cautious in this. Girdwood is a very important community, but it is a very small center of the population. And considering that, for example, those that are struggling with homelessness or we just have a bigger population base in Anchorage that maybe has more of a visible impact, but we would certainly welcome anybody from Girdwood to apply if they're going to be treating members of their community with this. But I can't tell you today, but I'll look.
So I'm going to jump in briefly and ask, because I received similar communications and it raised many questions for me. And of course, that raises the question, what about Eagle River and Chugiak and Klutna and et cetera? And one bit of information that I don't think we've seen, but maybe could gather at some point in the near future would be an economic distribution of revenue, where the money's coming from. And maybe even by assembly district would be a wise thing to have just as information, not as a black and white, hey, we need to reappropriate these funds based on that information, but it might be helpful for us to see, where these revenues are coming from. So Ms. Allard is in the queue. If you're
thank you. I was going to say the same thing, but you jumped in front of me. I agree. If there's a way we can look at that, I mean, Eagle River is about, I think the census came back and we're at about 50,000 individuals. I've heard the same things from Eagle River. I believe it was dispersed percentage wise according to population before, but I would definitely look into it. I know that Ms. Domboski's accurate when she says that the bulk of the issues are located in Anchorage. So it'd be hard to just divide it by percentage. We have less of a homeless issue in Eagle River. So our Chugiak Eagle River. So that makes sense that we wouldn't have certain dollars as much go there as other things. But like Mr. Constant and Dunbar, I've received those emails too. And maybe we can look at the administration, perhaps itemizing maybe the percentage of where the funds are going. Thank you.
Yeah, and for me, it's where they're coming from is also important. But Mr. Wellington.
Thanks, and appreciate Forrest bringing up Girdwood, and in typical Girdwood fashion, they aren't really overreaching, and they're kind of looking at what can they do for themselves. And the requests that I've seen so far that were concrete were really just when you're doing training, include us in that training and help cover some of our costs for coming up to do the training. So it wasn't something that lent itself so much to the grants, is just fold us into some of the activities that you'll be doing anyway. But I'd expect to have an amendment at our meeting, I think, on Friday that kind of outlines that. Thanks.
All right. Anyone else wish to put themselves in the queue? All right. I think would the administration like to have any final comments before we conclude and just take all of this and think about it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We appreciate the opportunity to kind of walk everybody through this. We know this, especially when we get new programs off the ground, it takes a little while to get the flow or the cadence for how much money is coming in, how fast these monies are getting spent. So we will keep you updated. Like I said, I think the most information that will be very helpful to Assembly members will be once we close the books and reconcile. I think it'll give us a really good the first full year of seeing these funds. Well, actually, that'll be next year, won't it? But it'll give us the first year of closing it out and seeing how these funds have been spent. We also appreciate the questions that Assembly members have raised, and we'll get you, we'll do some research for you and get you that information as quickly as we can. With that, Mr. Chair, when can we expect amendments that we'll be able to start seeing amendments?
I heard somebody say a work session on Friday. I don't know that I have that one on my books, but I know pretty soon because we have a vote on Tuesday, or at least an opportunity for a vote on Tuesday. So I'm looking at my calendar now.
It's
Yeah,
1 to
so there's a
1.
work session from 1 to 3 on Friday. Assembly proposed amendments.
Okay, well, we will do our best to get you the answers to your questions pretty quickly, so you can contemplate those as you develop your amendments.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Presverdy, I saw you might have lit up like you wanted to speak again.
Nope, I'm good,
Okay.
thank you.
Very good. Well, with that, if there's nothing further from anyone else, thank you everybody for participating, and we'll talk with you soon.